So some of you might know I joined Twitter this month. Woo! Very late in the day, I know, but what I've heard from my more established Twitter friends is that, particularly in the early phases, it makes you even more political and even more opinionated than you already are, which could be an interesting combination for me, but we'll see. I was really inspired by all the back and forth and discussions that happen on Twitter, and inspired me to create my own YouTube series, which I'm going to call Debate, Not Hate, to discuss some of the issues which are affecting clinical psychology and psychology more broadly. So today's episode, I want to focus on the increasing fees for applying to the Clinical Psychology Doctorate, which have gone up this year. So let's get right into it. So I've got my notes and I've got my digital notes because one cannot come to a debate unprepared. So I thought I would start off by just giving a bit of background to the issue, just in case you're not familiar with it. So here in the UK, when you apply to the Clinical Psychology Doctorate, you do so through this website called the Leeds Clearinghouse page. On this website, you're going to find information about the courses, about statistics associated with applying, and it's also where your application is managed. So this is where you're going to put all the information regarding your personal statements, your work experience, your references go there. And the charitable organisation which run this website and this platform will manage your application from beginning to end. So they will send it out to your course, the courses that you've selected, and they will update you on any progress in terms of whether you've been offered an interview, a place, or what have you. So there's always been a fee, and 2 cycles ago when I applied, it was £24. In this most recent cycle, that has been upped to £40, which represents almost a 70% increase in price for the applicant. It is worth mentioning that there is an early bird fee, so if you get your application in a month before, then they knock off £10. But overall, we're talking about percentage-wise a significant increase. So the Leeds Clearinghouse page did address this on their website. They do make reference to the fact that they have considered that this is a really difficult time for everybody, but they are, as I said, a charitable organisation and they've suffered their own financial difficulties. And as a board, they've agreed that this is the way to secure the financial viability of the organisation moving forward. That all sounds fair enough, and I suppose we're talking about a £16 increase from one year to another, which I guess in tangible terms doesn't feel like a lot, but I got really annoyed about it, and I was like, why am I annoyed? Am I overreacting? It's not a huge amount of money when we boil down to it. But then I saw this thread go off on one of the groups that exists in the internet stratosphere for aspiring psychologists. And I was like, yeah. And it got 119 likes, which is pretty much the measure of unanimous approval. And this made me want to unpick the issue a little bit further. I think the primary gripe for me when it comes to the timing of these fees is this discussion around diversity, which is very nicely raised by Belle in this comment. So 2020 has been a stonker of a year. Wow, it's definitely one for the history books. But with all its bad parts, it has definitely raised conversations around diversity and racism, which are just so important. And clinical psychology has realised that it's got its own issue when it comes to representation. And there's been a lot of exciting conversations about how we're going to improve representation and improve accessibility and do all this and do all this. And we're reaching a climax. And then it's we're going to increase the fees to apply. And you're a bit this seems like odd timing. And I think I just want to come back in terms of the actual financial burden that applying brings, because I think it's easy for people who are maybe not a mental health professional or maybe higher up in the food chain as a psychologist. I think it's easy for them to forget just how difficult it is financially when you're first getting started. I just want to use myself as an example because I don't mind talking about my finances, but I was an assistant psychologist working in London when I was first getting my foot on the ladder, and I think both of those characteristics mean that I was commanding probably on the upper end of the salaries that you could get for entry-level psychology-related roles. So in a month, I was earning clean, after taxes, after everything, probably about £1,500 a month. Okay, now let's remove my rent and bills. Now, let's say for food, for travel, I'm spending about £70 a week. So let's remove that in a calendar month. And let's also give myself a budget of about £50 to cover kind of out-of-pocket expenses or additional miscellaneous bits, you know, any breakages, any kind of repairs, any bits of clothing that I might need, toiletries, cleaning products. Let's take that for a calendar month. Let's take away my phone bill. I mean, you're quickly seeing that this cash like goes very, very quickly just to cover the basics. And yeah, like I could afford to apply. It would sting. I mean, to be honest, paying £40 for anything still stings a little bit at the moment. But I would be able to do it. But like, this isn't about a person like me. You know, I occupy many of the characteristics which are very, very well represented in clinical psychology. This is about increasing access for people who come from more diverse backgrounds. So they might be parents, they might have dependents, like family members who rely on them for financial contributions. They might have long-term health conditions and expensive prescriptions, or like fancy equipment that they need to kind of sustain their own quality of life. And you quickly see how this pot of money just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to the point where you're probably in minus. And like I said, it just seems to come at a really odd time. Like, you know, many people will probably feel really encouraged and galvanized by all the discussions that are going around in terms of diversity and accessibility, that, you know, we might be accessing like really exciting candidates who are suddenly feeling confident about their ability to occupy a primarily, you know, white and middle class profession. And then in the same breath, we then just like whack on an even greater application fee, which just seems to sit uncomfortably with me. And you know, the Leeds Clearinghouse, they have acknowledged this, but it's a little bit like, was this really the best time to do it, and what message does that send? And I think a second but closely related point, which just asks the question of like, why now? This seems like weird timing. It's just considering the fact that we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Now, I know that this has really hit organisations as well, but if you just think on like an individual level, I mean, we still are trying to kind of get to grips with just how much is going to impact our mental health, our economy, just to name two factors. And kind of on a more granular individual level, so many people have lost their jobs. So many people are struggling to find work, you know, like maybe after qualifying or completing their studies. It's a really, really tough job market out there. And if you're thinking about the kind of people who are coming from the diverse backgrounds, you know, maybe it's them who's lost their job, maybe it's their partner, but like overall, I feel like the chances are that people's household income has decreased in these times. And it just seems like a really difficult time to just raise that barrier even more, so people really think twice about applying. And I kind of, one of the comments that came up on the thread was this one, and I thought that was like, you know, it's such a good point that when you're applying to the Clinical Psychology Doctorate, I mean, the chances are completely stacked up against you anyway. Like for the vast majority of people, it takes more than one application to get on. And it's a really kind of like obscure and confusing process as it is. And a lot of people recognize that they're going to need like a couple of, you know, practice goes just to throw their hat in the ring and to get to grips with the process and try to understand and gather as much information as they possibly can about it. Because to be honest, not that much information exists. But I think also if you're thinking about people who are coming from more limited financial means generally, maybe a more working class background, and you're thinking, okay, what are my chances of actually getting on? This genuinely feels like taking £40, putting it in the toilet and flushing it away. And it's like, if money is really tight for you at the moment, it's just not something that you're going to do, especially not if you have other people to support. And I think the third issue that I want to discuss, which just like helped me to deconstruct a little bit why I was having such a strong reaction to this increase in fees, is just this issue of transparency. So this person on this thread, there we go, he very helpfully did the maths for us. And it just seems like an awful lot of money. So year on year, The Clinical Psychology Doctorate attracts about 4,000 applicants, and from their report last year, the very vast majority of them will pay the full fee compared to the early bird fee. So if we're kind of predicting kind of the similar trend, that is like 160 odd K that they're getting from applicants. And they've also said that they're significantly increasing, that's their word, significantly, increasing the fees for individual courses, although that is an undisclosed amount. So if we're kind of thinking like, maybe we're getting plus the 200K mark, I don't know. Like, that is an awful lot of money to be playing around with. And I think it's almost worth remembering like who your applicants are. Like, the vast majority of us occupying entry-level mental health roles will be sitting on around, say, like 18 to 26K salaries per year. And it's like, that just sounds like a huge sum of money. And like, I don't pretend to know anything about the amount of money that goes into running a charitable organisation or sustaining and maintaining a platform which does kind of work with a lot of traffic in a particular time of year. But then I think also we haven't really been given much information about that. And I decided to like have a look at their newsletter to just see if there was like any kind of explanation about where this money would be going. And there was one paragraph which I will read verbatim. So they say, for a number of years now, we have been wanting to develop the Clearinghouse website. The present website does not enable us to make any significant modifications to the current application process, in line with changes that have been suggested by applicants on programs in recent years. We want to be able to respond to these suggestions and offer an improved service to all users in future. However, this has not been possible so far with existing funds. This is also part of the rationale for increasing fees. Okay, so here are my thoughts on that. So first of all, okay, let's start with the good. Okay, it's great that they've taken feedback on board and they're thinking about it and they realise that there are things that need to be done to update the website and make it an improved experience for everyone. Like, glad to hear that. I'm also glad to hear that they're telling us a little bit about where that money will go, which is going to go into a website, which again, I've got no idea how much it costs to kind of update and run those kinds of things. So I don't know if that's a reasonable amount. But I suppose here's my issue. Well, number one, they say that's only part of the rationale. They don't really explain like where the other bits of money would need to go. And number two, again, it just feeds into this like weird timing of it all. Like, if we're thinking about like having an updated website versus making the application feel accessible and achievable for more people, I'm like, I know which one I would go for. And I think it's almost like a question of momentum. Like, we've gathered some momentum when it comes to talking about diversity and inclusion and representation. And it's just like, this just seems like a bit of a stopper to that momentum. It's like, if we were all pulling in one direction, that just seems to be kind of pulling in the opposite. So like, if it were me, I'm like, okay, the website seems to be running pretty well. Like, I went through it a couple of times. I didn't really pick up any massive issues. I'd kind of rather keep it as it is if the flip side means that more people will feel more welcome. And I think part of the frustration, I saw one of these comments on the thread which jumped out at me. And I thought, like, this is it is a really good point. Like, when you're thinking about clinical psychology applicants, we're a very conscientious and hardworking group. And most people will do almost anything to be able to apply and throw their hat in the ring. Because I think you've got to remember, like, the Clinical Psychology Doctorate is super unique. It's 3 years, it's a good contract of time where you're paid to train, and then on the other side you come out and you can walk out, well, no, not walk out because you worked really hard, but you can then occupy what is a pretty senior role within the NHS, and there aren't that many streams which offer you kind of the same characteristics and virtues. So I think you've got to remember, like, the course is this huge carrot, and people will trip over themselves to be considered for it and to like sit in front of people who interview them. And it's just like, I think a lot of people feel like they would do anything. They will pay the money to get on, but it's almost like I kind of just have to like grin and bear it and swallow the bitter pill. So I'm going to try and tie this discussion up a little bit, which feels kind of challenging because I don't think there is a clear way forward or solution necessarily, which probably compounds some of the frustrations that people like me and aspiring psychologists have been feeling with respect to this issue. However, something that I was chewing over and, reflecting on, I'm such a psychologist, but, was this idea that it is kind of frustrating that there are, so many different organizations and moving parts involved in the process of like getting you from an aspiring psychologist to a qualified psychologist. Like, if the clearinghouse organization was linked to another organization which can pull in revenue from different streams like memberships and things like that, like for example, say like the BPS does, like potentially some of that money could then be siphoned off to, subsidize application fees. And I haven't thought this idea through all the way, but if something like that were to exist and, I was a qualified and like they told me that part of my money was going towards supporting the next generation of clinical psychologists to get their foot on the ladder, I'll be well up for that, because I know how difficult it is, and it's just so nice to feel like you're getting a little bit of a helping hand on the way, and it's not turning really good and exciting people away from the profession because this is just one obstacle too many. But yeah, this is just me thinking out loud. I'd be super intrigued to hear if any of you have like other suggestions or thoughts or critiques about how to move things forward. I think I'd also be interested to hear from Clearinghouse if this is planning to be kind of like a short-term increase just to cover, like plug the gap and focus on the website, and then things can be brought down. But yeah, I think overall information is king, and it would be nice to have some more clarity around the issue. But yes, I currently hope that you, Jesus Christ, I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion, and I will really look forward to speaking to you next week. Ciao for now.